Welcome to another episode of Growth Hacker TV. I'm Bronson Taylor, and today I have David Lieb with us. David, thanks so much for coming on the program.
Yeah, my pleasure. Good to be here.
Yeah. Now, David, you are the co-founder and CEO of Bump. For those that have been living under a rock for the last couple of years, tell us, what is Bump?
Yeah, Bump is a mobile app for iPhone and Android that lets you connect two devices and share information by literally just bumping the phones together. So I came up with this idea about 4 years ago when I was a business school student at Chicago. So I'm an engineer by training and by practice, but I went to business school to learn how to start a company. But the first week of school, I was meeting all of these new people and found it really difficult to type in their phone numbers, type in their names, get their email address right. So we built Bump basically just to solve that one little problem, put it on the App Store, and it became extremely popular. And today, now, it's been downloaded by more than 130 million people. So it certainly has expanded since then, and we can talk all about that as we go forward.
No, absolutely. So 130 million people. That was my next question because I looked online trying to find out how big you guys have gotten, and you increased by the millions so quick that every article was like 10 million off. And then I look at another article and it's like, it's 10 million off. And I'm like, all right, I have no idea how big they are now. I just have to ask him. So 130 million people using Bump. So tell me, how much have you spent on advertising and marketing to get to 130 million people?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and the answer is $42. And I know that's exactly.
Wait, did you miss a comma in there or something?
No. So the real answer is we've never spent anything on distribution or user acquisition. The $42 actually was before we had launched, when it was still just three of us working on this as a side project. We wanted to film a demo video to put on YouTube so that people could see what this looks like. And I had to go buy some black felt to put behind the actor's hands. And so I bought some black felt for $22, and then I needed a videotape for the rented camera that I was borrowing from the school, and the videotape packs only came in packs of 3, and it cost $20, so $42.
So it could have been less if they had sold them, as singles there. That's great. So how did you grow then? If it wasn't, through advertising and marketing and traditional things, something has to happen to get to 130 million users.
Absolutely. Yeah, so the answer is it's word of mouth distribution. And I can explain that a bit more. So for Bump, 80% of people who download the app, we know bump with somebody else within 10 minutes of using the app. So that tells us it is absolutely people telling their friends, hey, I got this new cool app, download it and I'll show you how it works. So because the app is really magical and delightful. It does something that you would not expect your phone to be able to do without knowing about it beforehand. And two, it requires two people to do it. So you have this natural, hey, I got this cool thing that I want to show you, but in order for me to show you, you've got to download the app. And that allows it to just grow really virally by word of mouth.
Yeah, you mentioned the word magical, and it really is magical. I understand engineering and I understand products. And yet when I see Bump work, I'm like, wait, what is it doing? It's not using near-field communication. It's not using some complicated hardware hack. It's doing something with an algorithm using software in the cloud. And yet to the end user, to grandma, it doesn't matter how complicated it is because it's so magical in the moment that you use it. So I think that's actually one of the few products where that word makes sense and it's not just marketing hype. It really is kind of magical. Are there any transferable lessons for startups that want to create a product that has this kind of natural virality? Do you have any words of wisdom that would lead them toward these sorts of products, or is it just random, nothing you can do to help them?
Well, certainly having a product that requires two people to use it, lends itself to virality. Mm-hmm. Now, I really don't like the word virality because I think it's way overused. But what I mean is a product that when one user has it, basically he's forced to touch other users and he likes it. And that last part is a big difference because a lot of products kind of force you to spam your friends or trick you into, checking all of the list of your contacts and accidentally inviting everybody. And what we try to do is just build stuff that people actually like. And so nobody likes it when apps do that. So we don't do any of that. And we're fortunate in that our app just inherently requires two people to use it. But I think the other thing that you can do, and this is my main advice to people when they're talking about building products, is figure out who your market is. And for us, our market was everybody in the world that has a phone. That was our aspirational market. And so we decided, well, in order to build a product for that market, it's got to be, a product that can satisfy the mass market, which is people who are not technophobes, people who are not technophiles, people who don't look at products all day long for a living, which is what we do. So you have to design things in a very different way. And so the big idea there is try to keep things really simple. And we can talk more about this idea of simplicity, but the big thing that I think Bump really nails is that it's very cognitively simple. You can explain how it works to somebody in 5 minutes or 5 seconds, and they really understand how it works, even though they don't know the back end workings of like what's happening on the server, how it actually works. But the mental model of, oh, I select something on this phone, I bump this phone, and it appears on this phone. That's really simple, and it puts the user kind of in the middle of that flow so that he really sees it. And I think that makes it something that people want to show off because they're kind of part of the experience.
Yeah, you mentioned the phrase cognitive simplicity, and recently you wrote an article for TechCrunch it was about cognitive overhead. So let's dive into that a little bit. What is cognitive overhead? Because I think this article is brilliant, so let's jump into it a little bit.
Yeah, so this is a topic that kind of emerged for us because we were trying to figure out why is Bump so popular. We know why it's viral, we know why people talk about it, but there was this other element that we were dancing around for a while, and we think we finally figured it out, and it's this notion of cognitive simplicity. So the idea of cognitive overhead, the definition that I think is the best one is basically the number of logical jumps that your brain has to make for you to understand what a product or a service is actually doing for you. When you look at products, some products are very low cognitive overhead. It's very clear exactly what's happening. The user doesn't have to think about, what's going on. The user doesn't have to experiment to use the product to see how it works. Those products tend, in my opinion, to resonate with the mass market much better than products that lack that cognitive simplicity.
Yeah. What are some key ways to lower the cognitive overhead of a product? Is it just ripping out buttons and features? Is it more nuanced than that? I mean, how do you achieve cognitive simplicity?
Yeah, it's very different from what people talk about when they talk about simplicity generally. So the way I think about it is there's this word called simplicity, and there are a lot of vectors along which you can optimize simplicity. One is number of buttons on your interface, for example. Fewer buttons is simpler. One is amount of time it takes to complete a task inside of your product. You can minimize that, and that might be simpler. Another might be minimize the time it takes to do some sort of action. That might be deemed simpler. But what we believe is that the thing you should optimize for first is cognitive simplicity, which often comes contrary to those other ideas of simplicity. So, for example, a product might be cognitively simpler if you make the user go through more steps to complete the task rather than fewer steps. So make the user click along with you. One of the ways to lower the cognitive overhead, make your product more cognitively simple, is actually to make it take longer to get the result for the user than make it shorter, which seems contrary to what you would imagine. But for example, imagine you're a travel website and you're a travel search website. Actually slowing down the process of returning the results and maybe making the user click more things along the way to get to the results can make it more clear to the user exactly what's happening and what work the service is doing on the user's behalf. Compare that to maybe a more simple version, which you type in what you want, hit search, and instantly it comes back with some search results. It's more difficult for people to understand, what did it do? Did it search everything that I wanted it to search? Did it really take into account my preferences that I wanted to tell it? So that's one example, is a pretty simple example of how sometimes optimizing for cognitive simplicity runs contrary to what you might, in general, think of a simple product.
Yeah, and in the article, you mentioned some companies or products that kind of promised cognitive simplicity and didn't really deliver. What were some of those examples of, like, we thought it was going to be, but it wasn't?
Yeah, I think the best example is QR codes. So QR codes are like heralded as, oh, it's so simple. It's just a little 2D square that you scan with an app, and boom, it takes you to whatever website you want to go to. It has information behind it. It sounds really simple to us in the tech field, but the idea that it's a barcode, but it's not a traditional barcode, that I have to take a picture of it, but I can't use my camera. I have to use another separate app, and then by taking a picture of this thing, it takes me to a website. When in my life, to go to websites, I either click links or I type in a URL or search on Google. Mm-hmm. All of these things just layer on like cognitive overhead after cognitive overhead, and the result is that nobody uses them. And like I think there's a really good Tumblr which is called pictures of people scanning QR codes. .tumblr. And it's just a blank page because no one does it.
Yeah, talking about memes like that, I read a tweet the other day. It said, little known fact, all QR codes point to MySpace, but nobody knows this because nobody's ever used one. So you're right, though. It's almost like you can be simple in the wrong ways and completely fail. So simplicity is not the main thing, where cognitive simplicity is more of a primary thing. What are some examples of companies that you think do it well, that are really, obviously Bump is an example of that, but beyond Bump?
Yeah, there's a lot of companies you can look at and say whether it's good or bad. I think one of the most interesting examples, I think, is the Nintendo Wii. So it's not like a web or mobile product, but a physical product or a video game. And what's interesting about the Wii is that if you transport yourself back in time to when that first launched, it's a lot more complicated if you actually examine the product. There's a sensor bar that you have to calibrate that you put on top of your TV. There's this idea that I have to hold this thing in my hand and do things, and it's very different from what I'm used to where I tap on my controller. But what they nailed was that, it's a little more complex. Yeah, it takes a little bit more time to set up. Yeah, you have to explain it a little bit to somebody. But once you do, it just makes a lot of sense to people. I move my hand this way, and the thing on the screen moves its hand that way. And I think they really, there's little touches that they use that increase the cognitive simplicity. They always show an avatar on the screen. So you see a little body, and it doesn't look like you, but you can tell that it's a little person, instead of ever using it as a first-person thing where you don't see that body. So it allows you to connect your motions in the real world with the avatar's motions in the virtual world. And then that just makes it really, really simple. And as a result, you see kids who are 3 years old using the Wii. You see grandparents who are 75, 80 using the Wii with their 4-year-old grandsons. So that allows it to be a really mass market product, and it's been really successful.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. And I'm so glad you wrote that article because I'm a proponent of minimalism and simplicity, but this adds a new kind of texture to the whole discussion in my own mind that I'm going to start using with my own products. So I'm really glad you put that out there recently. Now let's go back and talk about the growth of Bump a little bit. Not recently, but as you guys were growing in the middle there, you translated the product, the app, into Korean and Chinese, and it led to really strong growth. Was that growth just an accident, or was it primarily because you translated it into their native language? What's the real reason it grew there?
I wish I could tell you. Usually with these things, there's so many variables playing at once that to be able to kind of deconvolve your actions versus the actions that your users are taking or what's going on in the market is really difficult. So in practice, like what actually happened there, we saw some initial growth in those markets, and we thought, whoa, we should, they're growing. We should localize it for their languages so they can speak the language, right? And so that probably accelerated it. It's really hard to know for sure, though, which things worked with which things didn't. Yeah. We could have done A/B tests where we, A/B tested and translated for some people, don't translate it for others, and try to measure the differences. But when something's working, you want to go 100% to the A/B test. So generally, when things are working, you don't get as much good data, which is a weird thing. So for us, growth and distribution has always been really good. So we haven't spent a lot of time understanding what drives growth. We know that it's word of mouth, but beyond that, we haven't spent a lot of time on it. We spend more of our time on how do we get people to use the app more often? How do we get them to really love it? How do we get them to rate it 5 stars every time that they see a rating?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight right there, because a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, they'll spend 1% of their time on the idea, and then 99% of their time trying to market the idea after it's built. Where you're almost the opposite. Let's spend all our time creating a product that wants itself to go viral, and then the marketing is, 40 something dollars, from Home Depot or wherever. So it's like, if you spend more time on the front end of things thinking about growth, you actually spend less time on the back end of things having to think about growth. So it's an interesting thing that you're this massive company with 130 million users, and you actually don't have a lot of good data because it just worked. So that's interesting on so many levels. Have you guys continued to try to translate it into other languages, or is that kind of the only ones you've done that for?
Oh yeah, no, we've translated into most of the popular languages in the world. Yeah.
Yeah, that's perfect. How big do you think? Go ahead.
For mobile developers, it's so easy to do that you really should do it as soon as you think you can handle whatever additional usage you're going to get because of it. So you always want to deliver a good user experience to people, but literally, it is maybe $25 to translate your entire app to another language, and it takes maybe 20 minutes to incorporate that language into your code. And boom, because we have these global app stores now, you get distribution immediately. And so when we first launched Bump, it was English only when we first launched, but on the first day it was used in 30 different countries. And that just speaks to the power of this new world that we live in, where everybody's got a mobile phone and they're all connected to the App Store or the Google Play Market, and boom, your stuff can get out there immediately.
That's great. I've yet to release anything in other languages, so to know that it's so cheap and so easy, that's good to know. Now, since Bump has come out, since the initial release, you've expanded the functionality of it quite a bit. How is the product different today than it was, out of Y Combinator, I believe, when you guys came out of there?
Yeah. The core philosophy is identical, really. When I was a business school student in Chicago, standing there in this big atrium typing in people's phone numbers, the problem that I saw was there should be an easier way to connect with other people or with other people's devices. Like, I've got all the information here in my phone that you want, and how do I get it to you in a really easy way that's quick and fast and simple? That idea has stayed the same. Yeah, we've added additional features. You can now bump photos, you can bump videos, I can bump you a PowerPoint presentation, I can pick up a file that I have on my PC, put it on my phone, walk over to your PC, bump it onto your PC. So what you can do with Bump has really expanded, but the core idea is the same. It's how do we make it really easy to create these simple connections in the real world?
Yeah. And have these new features where you add the ability to do photos and PowerPoints, have they increased the usage, or does the growth kind of look the same, same trajectory it was on already?
Oh yeah, we can certainly see, which users are using which features, and that's been really interesting to look at. We've kind of gone in a couple directions. We had a big spurt where we added a lot of features, and then we took a look at usage and realized, maybe all of these features aren't actually helping. Maybe we've made the product a little more complex than it should be, and then we had a little reduction where we took out some features. And so we've actually made some decisions that run contrary to growth, where we would axe a feature that we know a lot of people are downloading the app to try out, but we also know that they're not continuing to use it at the levels that they are other features in the app. So it would actually make the app better for people by removing those features, even though it may negatively impact our distribution and our growth. Yeah. And those are decisions that I think every product has to make. And these things are all trade-offs. I can make an app that gets incredible distribution, but doesn't actually satisfy any needs that people have. And that might be great for growth, but it's probably bad for the long-term prospects of the product and users.
I was going to say, so many of the people that come on here that have real growth, like the numbers you have, the product is very genuine at the end of the day. There's no gimmicks, there's no tricks. They'll take out things that are actually not helping them, even if they think it is. And that's it. I've heard it so much now that I actually believe it. Like, I actually believe that building a great product is what matters at the end of the day. And other things, they help, they can accelerate, they can improve, but at the essence, it's the experience, it's the cognitive overhead, it's the value proposition, it's the main thing, is always going to be the main thing. So I'm so glad to hear you echo the exact same sentiments.
Yeah. My main, we go to these growth hacker conferences and talk to people in the field, and there's usually this idea of how do we leverage whatever the new platforms for distribution are. So maybe that was Facebook 3 years ago. Twitter 2 years ago. Maybe now kind of using the address book and SMS is one of the main channels that people use. Email is a huge channel for distribution. And I think the thing that we realize is that whenever a new platform emerges, you can really leverage it. And because the signal to noise ratio is very high on those channels initially, people will pay attention to the communications they're getting there. But over time, as soon as people realize that those are good channels to communicate on, the effectiveness goes away. And the thing that we've noticed is that there's one channel that's very unique that never loses its signal to noise ratio and never gets overwhelmed by other communications, and that's word of mouth. That's me telling you as my friend, hey, check out this cool app I'm using. Like, let me show you how it works. I really love it. Like, you should download it. If your friend says that to you, especially in person when you're standing next to them, it's really difficult to not go check out that app. And so that's the thing that I think that's the tie-in to making products that are actually useful and delightful and make people happy, is that if you can really achieve that and become one of the top 5 or 10 apps that they can think of, or products that they can think of, they're going to tell their friends about it. And that's how you get this really sustainable growth.
Yeah, what a great insight. You know, we all hear about word of mouth and we all hear about leveraging platforms, but when you bring in the signal to noise as kind of the glue that holds it together, now we can compare apples to apples. Because before it's just like they're in their own world, you know, and it's hard to compare the two, and you just want both. But now it's like, oh, there's actually this higher order thing where we see why word of mouth actually wins, because the signal is just through the roof. So I love that insight. Now, since Bump, your team has also released a few more apps through Bump Labs. So one of those is Flock. It almost seems to have a similar thesis, but a very different use case all at the same time. So what is Flock?
Yeah. So Flock is an app that helps you get the photos that your friends take when you're with them. So we all feel this frustration of going out, hanging out with family or our friends, and everybody takes pictures, or maybe everybody except you takes pictures, and then you never see the photos because people forget to share them. When they try to share them, they share them on some website that you have to log into that you don't want to log into, or the photos are small and you can't see them very well. So there's all these problems that we face, and we decided, our philosophy is helping people create these simple connections and do what they want to do in the real world in an easier way. That was right in our wheelhouse. And so we knew that people were doing this with Bump. People were bumping 20 photos at a time from the weekend to their wife or their husband or their sister or their mom or something. And we saw, people really want to do this. How can we make it a little bit easier for them so that maybe if they're not in the same place anymore, they can still do it. So we built Flock as kind of a proving ground to test out these ideas. Can we build an app that accomplishes all of this in a really great user experience? And so that's what Flock is. And it comes out of this effort at our company that we call Bump Labs, which basically is a place for us to try out some new, maybe more futuristic ideas and work out the kinks before we, maybe decide to put it into the Bump app or decide to really scale up the effort on one of those other apps.
Yeah. What kind of consumer adoption has Flock seen? Or maybe first, when was it released, and then what kind of adoption have you seen?
So we released it on iOS at the end of July last year, and we released it on Android just at the end of the year. And yeah, the reception has been really great. What we wanted to do was kind of test out basically 2 core theses that we had. The first thesis was there's a big demand to share the other 90% of photos that you take. So 10% of them go to Facebook or Instagram, but the rest just sit there locked on your phone. We wanted to prove out that people actually do want to share those and they get value out of viewing them. That was the first thing we wanted to prove. And then the second thing we wanted to prove was, can this interaction modality that we created with Flock, where you don't open the app kind of tracks where you are and where your friends are and who your friends are and when people take pictures, and does all this computation on your behalf in the background, and then sends you an alert saying, hey, Dave, you've got 5 photos that you took with your friend. Do you want to share them with them? Those 2 ideas we wanted to test out and see if they work. And what we found with Flock is that they are true. People do want to share more than just the 1 or 2 photos that they put on Instagram, but they don't want to share it with 500 followers. They want to share it with 5 people. And then the second idea was, can we build an app that you don't have to think about, but still provides you value? And we've figured out that is actually true also with Flock. So those 2 things are proven out, and we're really happy with that. We haven't really focused on getting it to 130 million installs. the question is, do we do that with this app? Do we do that in conjunction with the Bump app? And these are things that we're working on right now.
I got you. Okay, so this is almost more of a really trying to prove the thesis than it is let's make a play here and see how big we can get something overnight. This is a larger thing going on in the background.
When we launched it, people said, "Oh, Bump's pivoting to Flock." And the way I think of it more is, I forget who said it. It might have been Steve Jobs, but it's much better to obsolete yourself than to have your competition obsolete you. Yeah. So when we look at what we're doing, we've been very successful with Bump, but what's next after that? What could be better than Bump for some use cases? And so we want to get ahead of ourselves and prove those out and know where we're going before it gets too late and somebody else figures it out.
So you mentioned, that the iPhone app came out in July and the Android app came out in December of last year for Flock. And I know you said you're not trying to grow Flock, real quick or anything like that. But I'm sure you've seen the usage numbers, like how people are actually using it in those time frames. And I'm interested in this because, Android obviously has more activations. I think I heard yesterday that they're going to have like 1 billion activations or something soon. I mean, just some crazy number. How many they're activating a day now, I don't even know. Where iPhone obviously has a lot less activations. But, I know people with Android devices that don't even install a single app. And that almost seems to be normal for Android, at least in the people I see. Have you guys seen that with the data, that iPhone usage is just way higher? Or do you actually see Android usage as a major thing?
It depends how you slice it. If you look at usage per user that already has the app, Android users actually are quite active. And in certain areas and for certain uses of Bump, they're more active than their iPhone counterparts. Okay. But for other regions and other types of usage, iPhone beats Android. So the answer is it really depends. Gotcha. What we see in terms of installations, people downloading the app, we do still get slightly more downloads per day on iOS than we do on Android. Yeah. And our user base on iOS is much bigger because we've had that for such a long time. Sure. But yeah, I mean, I think things are changing a lot, and it really depends on where you are and especially what product you're building. So if you're building a product that maybe targets more, high-end usage, you're probably going to see more iPhone usage. If you're targeting a product for regions that don't have as much iPhone penetration, you'll see more Android.
Yeah, no, that's great. Now, out of Bump Labs, one of the other products that you've come out with is called Bump Pay. Tell us, what is Bump Pay?
Yeah, Bump Pay is really simple. It does what it says. It's an app that you pay people by bumping. And that's another example of a product where we wanted to test out some ideas in a proving ground where we could separate all the variables out and not be confused by other things that are happening in the world with Bump, to really get some real data about whether we've built a feature that people like. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it is. We haven't updated it in a little bit. We are still kind of working on this idea of how do you make it easier to pay people in the real world. And this is another frustration that people feel on a daily basis. I wish I could pay you back for those movie tickets, but I don't have any cash and there's no ATM around. And so, we may do something in that space going forward. We may not. Bump Pay was a place to kind of test out and understand what's going to work, what's not going to work if we do really put the pedal down on that.
Yeah. Now, with Bump Labs, with Bump Pay and with Flock, I know these are theses, but, earlier you said with Bump itself that 80% of people, shared it with somebody else within 10 minutes or so. Do you see anything comparable to that with any of the things in Bump Labs right now? Maybe not that many percentage, maybe not that short of time period, but do you see that kind of, hey, word of mouth, look at this, I need to pay you, download it, I need to share photos, download it, kind of same use case?
We do. It differs a lot by the product, but I'll give you an example. With Flock, we certainly see people who get the app and they see, this is going to be a lot better if I get my 3 or 4 friends to install the app. So we see that somebody will download the app, and it's not always the case, but sometimes that person says, I've got to get my wife to download it. And so we see like one of that person's friends joins immediately. And generally those folks are the ones who have a good experience because they've gotten all of their friends to get on the product and they start getting photos that they want to see. Yeah. So we do see similar patterns, but they're all very different. With Bump, it is, within 10 seconds, somebody tries to get somebody else to bump with, so you can see the value of the product. Mm-hmm. With Flock, that takes a little bit longer because you have to go it's not just any person that you can use it with. It's
Mm-hmm.
a few key people that you want to use it with. So you
Mm-hmm.
have to wait for your wife to get home from work, and then you talk to her about it.
Yeah.
But the general idea is the same. And I think for any product that we build, because what we do is help people connect with other people or other devices, we're always going to see this natural mode where somebody gets the app or any of our apps, they decide, oh, I want to use this, and then they go find a way to use it with somebody else.
Yeah. With the labs in general, I think it's such a good idea to have the labs for all the reasons we talked about, to obsolete yourself, or if nothing else, to roll new things into the product that get traction, things like that. What have you learned about kind of running a labs with inside a company? Because there's a number of companies that try it. I don't know how many do it well. Maybe what are some of the pitfalls of trying to run a labs? Because I'm sure there's resource, problems and all those things. What are some of the things that maybe, you could say, hey, do it this way, it works? Any insights on that in general?
Yeah, certainly all of those are concerns and things you got to think about. I think the biggest pitfall or thing you need to think about is focus. Focus doesn't mean resources or number of people working on one thing or what it looks like in the press or any of that. It's really what are you focused on and what things are really getting your attention. And you want to devote some attention to these new efforts, but you can't take your eye off the ball on your main thing. And so that's, I think, the biggest pitfall. And that has all these repercussions also. Mm-hmm. Internally, you have to really communicate well exactly what the intentions are with each of your experimental projects, so that your team understands, okay, I'm working on this and this is the reason why, but if we see that, if this doesn't get continued, it doesn't mean that I did bad work or the product failed.
Expectations.
So those sorts of things are definitely things you have to manage. And I think that the big advantage of doing this is, it's fun. Like it's
Mm-hmm.
fun to work on new cutting edge ideas and ideas where the probability of failure is higher. Like that's often more fun because you're to like pioneer something new. And so it's a great way to just keep people in the company engaged and thinking and having their brains be working on what's the future. And we do this. It's the same reason companies do hackathons. We do hackathons fairly often. And it's the same idea. It's just cultivating this mindset of innovation where everything we built is great, let's keep working on it, but like what's better than what we have today? And sometimes you'll find a real gem in there.
Yeah, and I think labs, like you said, it's a great way to keep an entrepreneur interested in their own company, because so many entrepreneurs are serial entrepreneurs. They want to go on to the next thing. They're excited about something else, where as a startup becomes a business, it finds its business model, it finds its traction, all those things. Then you can turn to the labs and become an intrapreneur and really start doing the same kinds of things in a smaller way within their own company, and that can keep them around, because I'm sure Bump without David is a very different Bump. Like it's your vision, it's your baby, it's your thing, and so I think more entrepreneurs might consider trying a labs instead of trying a new startup. Just my tidbit of advice there.
Yeah. If you can pull it off, I think it's a great thing to do. And the key, though, I think another thing to watch out for is you don't want to stray too far from your vision. So if your company's vision, ours is helping people connect in a really easy way. If it strays too far from that, then you start to have these like identity issues of, wait, I thought our company was this and now it's this. Are we changing? Are we going to split the company in half? What's going on? You got to be careful for that.
Yeah, and you can't really compact the return on investment. Like, if something works in the labs, you may not be able to roll it into the main thing. It may not have any, a crossover there. So you're going to lose a lot if you get, too far off mission there. Well, David, this has been an awesome interview for so many reasons. One last question for you here before we end. What's the best advice that you can give to anyone that is trying to grow their startup? No pressure.
Yeah, I think so. As anyone who's an entrepreneur knows, it is a roller coaster ride. And you hear people say that, and you think, okay, I'll prepare for it. It's going to be a roller coaster. But you really don't understand what that means until you're in it. And so I think the number one thing to combat all of the bad things that could happen from being on that roller coaster is to build something that you really believe in and that you enjoy working on, a product that you want to exist in the world. And if you do that, then you'll be able to get through all of the ups and downs in a really long-lasting way. And so that's the main thing. I wouldn't build something because you think there's like a business opportunity there. I wouldn't build something because somebody else might want it. Build something that you really believe in, and then everything else will just be the day-to-day execution of that vision.
Yeah, that's great advice to end on, David. Again, thank you so much for coming on the program.
My pleasure.